Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
So this is generally the time of year that there aren't new cameras because most cameras come out, in spring so they can sell to people traveling in the summer. But Panasonic just released a new camera called the S9. In fact, it might not actually be out available yet because I'm looking at a review on Petapixel where Chris and Jordan are doing a video review of a pre-production model. And seeing the article about this camera made me think about something interesting. So this is a very small, think Fujifilm X100 VI, a very small camera, but it's full frame. And the reason it's full frame is because, this is weird, Panasonic says that full frame is easier for beginners to understand. Now, if you've only had a smartphone and you go to buy a camera, full frame sounds like it's a full thing, right? But later in the article, it talks about how they think micro four thirds is hard to understand. Well, it's not that hard to understand if someone explains it. And then APS-C, well, that's no easier or no harder. And then medium format, medium format must be smaller than full frame. So we thought we'd do an overview of those four types of sensors and what they mean. We're not going to talk about mobile phone sensors or anything like that.
Right. So I love this idea because there's so much marketing wrapped up in this. Because, just take things on the surface, right? Full frame. Well, of course, I want to get the thing that gives me the full image. I don't necessarily need to know what the dimensions are, what the aspect ratio is, how it performs in terms of depth of field and all of that. It's full frame.
But 4/3 is 1 1/3. So isn't that more than full frame?
But look at you. You've introduced math to the equation. And math is the enemy of marketing, I would say, because it's not actually like even a math thing because it's 4/3. Sure, that's like bigger than 1, but it's micro 4/3. So it's a 1 1/3, but it's a smaller 1 1/3. Like, what?
Yeah. Math and marketing is a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, micro 4/3 is very easy to explain. It's 4:3.
What?
It's a 4:3 aspect ratio.
It is. Yes.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, micro 4/3 was maybe the first mirrorless option or one of the early mirrorless options.
I think it was one of the earliest mirrorless options, and it became popular because mirrorless cameras had a lot of advantages in the fact that they didn't have a mirror that moved every time you wanted to take a photo.
Right. And also in terms of size, people wanted a good quality camera that was small because otherwise you're getting a small camera. It typically had a poor resolution sensor. Maybe it was cheap. Maybe it was like a, quote unquote travel camera. And so micro 4/3 comes out and they had to differentiate themselves from digital, everything else, and film and all of that. Personally, I never paid much attention to micro 4/3. And I think some of that was because it was and maybe still is a little culty.
Ooh.
I know. I
culty.
You notice how I hesitated when I said that because it definitely has its adherents. It seems like to be honest, sort of like Fuji owners, Leica owners. When you believe that this is the best thing, then you want to evangelize for it. And I think there were a lot of people who were evangelizing micro 4/3. And when you compare it to something like APS-C or full frame, then you can start to get into, well, it's a smaller sensor. You're probably not going to have some of the benefits of a larger sensor and light gathering ability and all those things that we've talked about forever. But it seemed people were pushing it too hard, like, no, this is really great. Believe me, I'm going to show you how much it's great. Don't look at anything else. Look at how great this is. Now, I'm going to jump ahead and just say the great big obvious thing, which is if you have a micro 4/3 camera or an APS-C camera or a full frame camera, it is absolutely possible to take good photos. So you don't even have to be like, oh, I only have a Micro Four Thirds camera. If only I had a full frame camera, my photography would be 150% better.
Actually, it would be about 300% better because a full frame sensor is about 4 times the size of a Micro Four Thirds.
See? Math keeps pushing in. It's almost as if photography is a, I don't know, scientific mathematical art. Like that does apply. And honestly, there are situations where a full frame camera will do better than a Micro Four Thirds camera. There have been many times, I shoot Fuji, which is an APS-C format. There have been many times when I've been shooting with friends who have the full frame cameras. We've been in the same spot, and like his images of the same thing are better for some reasons. But typically, that's like at the edges.
Because he's a better photographer?
That is entirely possible. But I'm talking technically in terms of like shooting astrophotography. Like a full frame camera will be great for astrophotography just because of its light gathering ability.
Okay, well, let's ignore those special cases, right?
Exactly.
Let's just look at average cases. What's important to know is that 4/3 is the aspect ratio of most smartphones. So if you're using an iPhone, by default, you're shooting in 4:3 ratio. Now you're in a tiny sensor, but it's the same aspect ratio. A full frame is a 3:2 ratio. In fact, it is almost exactly 24 by 36 millimeters, which coincidentally is the size of 35 millimeter film. APS-C comes in between the two. It's in a 3:2 aspect ratio. There are, it seems, 2 versions of APS-C. Canon has one, Nikon, Pentax, and Sony has another. Canon has APS-H, which, let's make this all simple because, as the Panasonic guy says, all this stuff is too complicated for people. I don't think it's too complicated, but I think what's important to know is that you're committing yourself to an aspect ratio to start with. You're committing yourself to the size of a sensor, and a full frame sensor is about 4 times the size of a Micro Four Thirds. Looks to be about 2.5 times an APS-C. I'm looking at an image on Wikipedia. I'll put a link in the show notes. It shows the relative sizes of the sensors like overlaid. And we haven't even gotten to medium format, which is about twice the size of a full frame. So what it comes down to is, as you said, whichever one you have, you can take great photos. One of the advantages of Micro Four Thirds, and when I first came to the UK in 2013, I bought an Olympus camera that was a Micro Four Thirds, and I had a couple before I switched to Fuji. There are multiple manufacturers who make lenses that you can use. So I could use Olympus or Panasonic lenses, and I think there are even others. It's not quite the same. With Fujifilm, you can use Fujifilm and some third parties, but all the Panasonic and Olympus lenses worked with all of the features, autofocus, etc., on all the cameras. So you had a better range of lenses to choose from. I'm not sure if that's the case with Canon, Nikon, Pentax, Sony, APS-C.
Actually, that's a great point to bring up because that was also a big selling point of Micro Four Thirds, which was it was more of a quote unquote open standard, such that any camera manufacturer could pick it up. And so if you bought a lens from Olympus, but you had a body from another company, that would be perfectly fine.
Another thing to point out is that Micro Four Thirds lenses are smaller because, well, the sensor is smaller, so they don't need to be as big. You can get some really compact cameras, and that's quite good. But anyway, we're not going to talk about the cameras and the lenses and the resolution. This new Panasonic is only 24 megapixels. Would you really want to buy a full frame camera with 24 megapixels? That seems too limiting.
Well, yes and no, because another thing about this that I think goes unremarked, and it's touched on in this article, is especially nowadays the way cameras are being engineered. When you have a larger sensor, and especially a larger sensor with a much higher resolution, you're generating a lot more data, which means that all that data has to be sent to the processor for processing in real time for things like super accurate, super instantaneous autofocus, being able to get focus on eyes of birds, for example, birds in flight, objects, things like that. And so when you have
They can focus on the eyes of birds now?
They can focus on the eyes of birds, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, seriously? Yeah. So some of the –
I thought they could only do like human eyes.
No. They can do pet eyes, bird eyes. I mean, like For example, if you were like a serious bird photographer, you would probably do better if you had a full frame sensor that was a lower resolution. Like, I can't remember which ones in the Sony line do this, but Sony tends to have like really, really good autofocus. And so you can be shooting, flying birds with a 600 millimeter lens, and it will keep it in focus because it like sees where the bird's eye is. It's really quite remarkable. But again,
it tells the contrast of the bird's eyes from the surrounding feathers.
Yeah, and it has machine learning to detect, this is where a bird's eye would be, and then this is where to focus on.
Oh, that's like AI, isn't it?
It is.
Machine learning.
It is. Yeah. It's all AI.
Yeah.
So anyway, but to be able to do those things, you need to transfer a whole lot of data back and forth from the sensor to the processor. So bringing this back to what we're talking about, if you have a smaller sensor like a Micro Four Thirds at a reasonable resolution, say, 26 megapixels, even maybe 40 megapixels, that data transfer is going to be much faster. And so you're going to get better performance in areas such as autofocus, or maybe shooting video. You're not going to have as much of the wiggly effect that happens when you're moving the camera, those sorts of things. So it's not just, I have this aspect ratio and this many pixels. It actually also translates to the experience and the performance while you're shooting.
This is complicated.
It is complicated. You know what? I kind of think that maybe it's too complicated for ordinary camera customers. As this person
– Actually, film is simpler.
Film is so easy. Film is so easy until you have to, develop it or
focus on bird's eyes.
Yeah, until you have to focus on bird's eyes.
There's no autofocus for that. There are some film cameras with a certain type of autofocus. I remember way back in the day, it was kind of like a laser that bounced off and back, something like that. But you don't get the continuous autofocus that you would get with modern cameras and lenses. So basically, you've got these different types of sensor sizes. We're going to ignore medium format. I mean, you've used your Hasselblad and all that, and there's the Fujifilm GFX line, and there are other medium format cameras. And I want to say these are special cases because of the price, because of the size of the cameras. It's a little bit different. For most people listening to this podcast, you don't really want to think about that. You want to compare full frame APS-C and Micro Four Thirds. I'm thinking it's like, this is getting into like computers with megahertz and RAM and, system bus speed and pipeline throughput and all that sort of thing. And it's getting really confusing. And so basically find a camera that you think looks cool. Just work with that because unless the worst thing about cameras is, I guess it's the same with computers. You have to commit to an ecosystem, right? With computers, though, you're not really buying much hardware. These days, most hardware is USB. So any hardware that you buy can be used with a different computer system. Here, you're buying the camera and then the lenses if you eventually buy a lot of lenses. I guess in some ways, if you're just getting your first non-phone camera, choose the camera that feels comfortable. Try them in your hand. See what you like. Do you want one of those big-ass DSLRs with all the buttons and knobs and the grip that you can hold it vertically and horizontally? Or do you want something like this, the LUMIX S9? We'll put a link in the show notes to the Petapixel article, which is a pretty simple camera without too many buttons and dials, and the front is pretty flat, and it looks like an old-fashioned camera, a lot like the Fujifilm, although one of the big differences, the size of the lens is quite large compared to the camera body because it's a full frame sensor and the lens has to be bigger. So that's another thing. With a full frame sensor, you have bigger, heavier lenses. With an APS-C or a Micro Four Thirds, you have smaller, lighter sensors. And when you look at the Fujifilm F100 XI, that you can slip into a pocket, an actual pocket, not one of these big, camera guy vest pockets. There's a big difference. So if you want a pocketable camera, you need to think about that.
Well, and going back to the top of this topic, which is like, honestly, I was making a joke, but I think the advertising and the marketing is really a huge thing for this, because they're trying to attract the people who have been mostly shooting with iPhones, or maybe they don't want to deal with all of the complexity that has been introduced in the camera world. I mean, everything we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes, it is easy to get into the weeds, and they want to appeal to people who say, I want something better than my phone. What can I get? And in the past, it's like, oh, well, you're going to want this APS-C camera with these multiple lenses and full, whatever. And I think what's smart about this is it's saying, here's a small camera. So it's in a form factor that's not going to be bulky or unwieldy, except maybe for the lenses. And it is full frame, so you know that it's going to be of a high quality now relative to everything else. But when you hear that in your brain, you're like, oh, well, this is full. And I have a photographer friend who insists on full frame being better than everything. So that's cool. I'm getting the good thing. And like, that's sort of the core message and the core decision-making thing of how to approach this if you don't know anything about all of these other sensors. And obviously, like, you can do lots of research, but when you have something like this, it's an appealing package, and it will make you think, oh, this seems to check all the boxes. I'm just going to go for that.
And it comes in 4 colors: standard black, red, olive green, and some sort of royal blue. If you want a camera that stands out, the Panasonic S9 is for you. It's really designed for content creators. I'm a content creator. I used to be a YouTuber. Now I'm a content creator.
I'm a content creator too.
It's got a rear panel that comes out to the front so you can, shoot yourself and you can see yourself and all that. Curiously, it doesn't have an HDMI jack, which is a bit of a failure. But I don't want to talk about this particular camera.
Yeah.
Because it's just an example of another small camera. It's $1,500, the body only, so it's not cheap. Compare that to, well, the Fuji X100 VI at $1,700. Other compact cameras, Micro Four Thirds, you can get much cheaper than that.
This episode of PhotoActive is brought to you by PhotoScout by Cascable. Have you ever planned out a landscape photo shoot and gotten skunked by the weather? What if you're scouting a spot and want to know at which day and time the moon will be positioned directly above a mountaintop? PhotoScout is the intelligent photo assistant that can point you in the right directions at the right times. You set up the criteria you're looking for, such as a vibrant sunset at a specific location, and PhotoScout will tell you the next anticipated time they're going to happen. To get that mountain moon photo, use PhotoScout's AR location picker to point your camera at the scene and tap a spot in the sky. PhotoScout will tell you when to be ready for that shot, even days in advance. Now, you may already have a few apps that will let you check the weather and see where the sun will appear in the sky at sunset or sunrise. Those are helpful, to be sure, but you need to go chasing that information. PhotoScout is an app that does that work for you in advance and tells you when to go get that perfect photo. PhotoScout has you covered with all that and more. You say where, PhotoScout says when. Check it out with a free trial today at photoscout.app. That's photo-scout.app.
So we've talked about this camera and we've talked about sensor sizes, but this Panasonic S9 has an interesting button on the back of it, which I don't think I've seen on any other camera. It says LUT. What does that mean?
That means LUT.
I guess, and so the Panasonic is talking about people who don't know a lot about cameras, and that the full frame is easier to sell. But how do you explain what LUTs are? It's not that hard to explain.
It's not.
So instead of being sarcastic, Jeff, why don't you give me a proper answer?
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. A LUT is a lookup table.
You mean like a dictionary?
Sure. No, not
you
like
look
a
up a word in a.
You look up
okay.
Yeah. Lookup tables are more used in video, or at least they have been more used in video. And the idea is it helps to define how colors should appear. So if there is red in your scene, well, maybe the lookup table will say, no, red should be less saturated or more toward the pink hue or more toward a darker hue. And it's a way to basically give your images a look different from lookup, but like a visual look, which is also a lot like you probably heard us talk about, like camera recipes, like Fuji uses.
Or film simulations.
Yeah.
Or presets or filters in different types of camera apps and cameras. Basically, this is taking what you're seeing and altering it. Now, LUTs are very commonly used in cinema. Now, if you've ever heard of color grading in cinema, take a film like Dune, for example. You can't imagine that it looked as yellow as it did when they were shooting it, right? So what they did is they made sure that the lighting's equal and they've got the white balance corrected and all that. And every time they've got a color, it's shifting toward the yellow end. So the lookup table is for each frame or each photo, taking the value of each pixel, the color value of each pixel, and altering it to what the lookup table wants it to be. It doesn't do things that you would get in film simulations and recipes like shadows, highlights, brightness, contrast, anything like that. It only changes color. Now, it's interesting that Panasonic is, well, I guess they're competing with Fujifilm because one of the reasons Fujifilm cameras are popular is because of these film simulations that replicate Fujifilm film stocks. And while you can't do that exactly with LUTs, again, this only affects color, you do have a wide range of possibilities in the way your photos look. And so the LUT button, you press it and you can choose from a bunch of different LUTs that are in your camera or LUTs that you've created in a Panasonic app and downloaded to the camera, or LUTs that you've downloaded from someone or purchased or whatever. A LUT is just a text file with a list of numbers, 2 columns, number this goes to number that. You can scroll through all of these, the same as you would in any other camera with recipes, film simulations, looks, whatever. And you can apply these to your photos relatively simply. Now, LUTs also work with a lot of photo editing tools. You can probably import the same LUTs into Lightroom or other apps.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, LUTs have mostly been like a post-processing tool. And I think what's interesting here is that they're now more and more being brought into the camera because people want to see what they're getting when they're shooting. Just like, switching to a black and white mode or, again, like on Fuji or Leica, switching to the Acros or whatever the Leica equivalent of Acros is.
Monochrome. Yeah.
Just monochrome.
They don't have a specific name because they don't name it after a film stock.
Oh, okay. And so, having that option to see as you're shooting helps you compose. And also it means that the JPEGs that you shoot are going to have that treatment to it. Now, if I was shooting with LUTs, I would absolutely be shooting RAW plus JPEG so that I would have the freedom to go edit the RAWs later. But again, we're also looking into that mindset, the hate to date myself, the younger way of shooting these days, which is like, I want to shoot something, I want it to have this particular desaturated, cool looking look to it, and be able to just take that file, put it online or share it with friends or do whatever, because I don't necessarily want to have to go and load everything into Lightroom or Photos app or whatever and do all that post-processing. So they're bringing this into cameras as a way to make it a lot more accessible, a lot easier to implement. But also it's important to point out that LUTs, they're not proprietary at all. These aren't things that, you can only get if you are using a Panasonic camera. They are available to everybody. And so it gives all these other manufacturers a way to have recipes and all these popular shooting modes that have driven sales of like the Fuji X100 series and some of those.
So again, there's a disadvantage that I mentioned earlier, that it's only colors. It's not shadows and highlights. It's not contrast. It's not anything else. I want to say that a LUT is really limiting because if you want to do any serious photography, just altering the colors isn't going to be enough. And I can understand doing it for video. Now, of course, if you're shooting a video, I'm sure you can also alter shadows and highlights in the camera once you figured out what you want, but you're not able to get the entire look from a LUT that you might want.
Actually, I'm not sure if that's true because LUTs are typically, I mean, in video, like for example, if you are shooting in log format, like, so you have even your iPhone 15 Pro and you're shooting video, but you're shooting ProRes log. What you end up with is a very desaturated, bland, almost gray image. And then you have to apply a LUT afterwards during post-processing. So I haven't done it enough to know how much of that it could also be contrast and things like that. I believe.
Well, what I'm seeing on Wikipedia says that it's just merely the 3D color values.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
that does make sense, though, I guess.
Yeah, you have your red, green, and blue color values in a 16-bit table here is the example they're showing, and that's what changes.
Okay.
So you are more limited when you're shooting. I don't know if this camera allows you to do a LUT plus contrast, shadows, and highlights. It probably does, but it kind of makes it more complicated to be using not just the LUTs, right? Like a film simulation, a recipe that cover all of the possibilities in the camera. It means that someone shooting pictures has to know enough to use the two. Otherwise, all they'll get is color-altered pictures, which may be fine. It may be what they want. But there are times when you do want more contrast and more shadows and highlights or, less of something.
Yeah, yeah. Which, I mean, look at us going back to the top of our topic. Do you need to know all of this? Do you need to
well, you certainly need to know what LUT means if you buy this camera.
Well, I guess that's true.
Because there's a button.
It is interesting that it's actually a button. It's not just like a menu item, right?
Yeah, it looks like it's a dedicated button on the back that you press, which I guess brings up a menu and it shows the different LUTs. I guess they have names or LUT 1, LUT 2 or whatever. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
It is a useful way to shoot pictures if you want to focus on just color. But after that, you do need to make other changes if you want to, again, shadows and highlights, contrast, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so if anyone does buy the Panasonic S9, which costs $1,500 just for the body, let us know. I'm not sure. The review of Chris and Jordan is the Panasonic S9 is small, pretty, and utterly baffling. So I'm not sure that this is like the ideal camera for anyone. They say Micro Four Thirds is difficult to understand. At least Panasonic says that. But I think this camera is kind of difficult to understand for someone who doesn't know it. I think, and we've been talking a while now about the popularity of the Fujifilm X100 series. I think it's good to see another compact camera coming out. I think this is going to be the market of the future. You're going to have these compacts and then the bigger, the big ass DSLR, the BA DSLR type camera. And you're not going to have as much in between because you don't need that big a camera. There's not much going on inside, right? There's a processor, there's an SD card, there's a battery, but you don't need much bigger than this for a camera to operate.
Yeah, in most situations, yeah. And, you also have to realize the camera companies, they are chasing the market. And for the last several years, these small portable compacts that are still high performing, those have been the market. And so that's what people are interested in. That's why you see so many of these cameras that are for, quote unquote, content creators and influencers, because those are the people who are buying these cameras. So I agree with you. We're going to see a lot more of this, maybe to the point of saturation. But, if camera companies are making good cameras, and I think this also ties into our episode last week, they're making interesting cameras, things that aren't just here's the same box with a few different features and a couple of different plugs, which has been the case for a long time. They're doing new and interesting things, and that's super interesting. That's cool. I applaud that.
Okay, should we do snapshots?
Let's do snapshots.
Okay, Jeff, what have you got?
I have a book. I ordered a book.
Ooh.
Like almost sort of spontaneously. It is a photography book even.
Ooh, that's good.
I know, it's crazy. I saw a review of this. It turns out it's not a new book, but I think the review was recent, and so I picked it up. It is called France is a Feast, The Photographic Journey of Paul and Julia Child. It's written by Alex Prudhomme and Katie Pratt. So I would not have picked this up if not for a TV show that was on, I think, Max – HBO Max, whatever it used to be called Julia, it ran for, I think, 2 or 3 seasons, about Julia Child and how she got started as a cookbook author and basically her TV show career. And I knew nothing about her husband, Paul Child, but he was a photographer. He was an artist. He worked for the U.S. government right after World War II, helping to do propaganda and basically encouraging Europeans to accept American culture, basically. But he and Julia were basically this couple they're both kind of weird. She was 6'2", and they would just wander Paris and wander around France. They lived there for several years. And so this is a book that has a lot of his photography, but it's also kind of the story of them. It's like 1947 to, I want to say, like the mid-50s. And all black and white photos, all just like seeing what Paris looked like at the time. And it's really quite charming. You see Julia Child, where basically, I don't want this to sound bad because the image that we have of Julia Child is this sort of larger woman in the kitchen that we all saw in videos and stuff. And at this point, like, she's 6'2", but she is super thin and just looks, almost looks like a different person. Which
she looked stylish back then.
She looked stylish. Yeah, exactly. And so it's neat to read about and sort of vicariously live through that idea of, you know what, we're going to go out and just wander the Seine, and we're going to find some restaurant in a back corner of a courtyard and just see where the day takes us. So maybe it's because I've been really busy lately and I'm in Seattle and I'm not traveling this summer because I've already done my travel this year. And so now I want to get a sense of that. And because I was in France a couple of years ago and really miss it. So France is a feast. Kirk, what do you have this week?
Well, I have a book too, nothing to do with photography except that there are people who take photos of people in the book, but it's just a minor thing. I really like spy novels. I like the twisty idea of spy novels. It's called The Scarlet Papers by Matthew Richardson. I'd never heard of this author. It is one of the best spy novels I've read in a very long time. The lead character is a sort of failed associate professor who's written a couple of books that no one bought about the history of spies and spying. He gets a card one day from someone who wants to meet him, whose name is Scarlet King, and he's like, oh my God, Scarlet King is this mythical British spy from back, even before World War II. And this leads into, as many spy novels do, all sorts of twists and turns and chases and things. And it's one of the best spy novels I have read in a long time. I read this in 1.5 evenings. It was a real page turner. So if you like that, The Scarlet Papers, Matthew Richardson, great spy novel. No LUTs in it. There are people taking photos of people. I assume they had film cameras, so they were full frame.
The book is probably entirely black and white, I'm guessing.
The book is all black and white, except for the cover, which is definitely color graded. But nothing to do with photography, but just a real good summer. This is a good beach read.
Oh, excellent.
Is what it would be. Or an airport read or something like that. So
that sounds great. Yeah. So when you're in the airport, headed to France for the Olympics?
Well, this starts out in London, and then it does travel around a little bit, but it's mostly set in the UK. So if you're headed to London and you find this in the airport, no, let's just go away and we'll tell them we'll come back in 2 weeks.
All right. That sounds great. We will be back in 2 weeks. Hope you're all enjoying your summer.
Thanks for listening to PhotoActive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discussed in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the end. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to PhotoActive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast.